Hello and welcome to the 81st edition of the GreenWave podcast by Synergy International. I'm Cinny, your host, and today's pod is titled The Cost of Climate Retreat. Across boardrooms and national capitals, climate targets are being softened, delayed, or dropped. The public argument usually starts with cost, expensive equipment, higher prices, and political trade-offs. Far less attention goes to the value created by a credible target or the investment lost when that signal disappears. That omission is commercially dangerous. Suppliers build capacity when they can see future demand. Banks lend when customers commit to buying. Boards approve capex when policy and procurement point in the same direction. Remove the target, and every decision becomes harder. A July 2026 Harvard Business School Working Knowledge Report gives us unusually clear evidence. It is titled, "Why Climate Goals Are Worth Setting, Even Aspirational Ones," and draws on a Harvard working paper. Corporate emissions targets as demand signals for supply chain coordination. We'll provide a link to the study so you can read the paper and learn more about its authors in our LinkedIn show notes. The researchers examined 5.6 million contract year observations from companies around the world. They then isolated 8,000 corporate climate announcements made between 2006 and 2023. Each announcement included a target year and received enough public attention to reach suppliers. The result is striking. After the first major customer announced an emissions target, the likelihood of a supplier entering a climate-related contract rose by 1.9 percentage points. A second customer added another 1.4 points. The share of climate-related contracts grew by about 5% against its previous average. Those figures sound small until you apply them across thousands of suppliers. A large customer sits at the center of a web of manufacturers, processors, and service firms. One target can alter expectations across that network, including among suppliers with no direct contract yet. The study also found spillovers beyond the immediate buyer and supplier relationship. Other producers saw the announcement and read the direction of demand. They began positioning for future work before the first purchase order arrived. For us at Synergy International, this is the central point. Climate targets are commercial signals. They tell suppliers which products will be needed, when demand may arrive, and how much confidence to place in a new market. That signal has a value. It can support factory planning, research budgets, and equipment orders. It can also give a lender enough confidence to finance the first serious project. A factory cannot finance itself on a mood board. The climate debate often calculates the cost of action in microscopic detail. Every subsidy is counted. Every compliance bill is debated. Every percentage point of higher capex receives its own panel discussion. The benefits receive looser treatment. Cleaner technology can become cheaper once suppliers invest. New production capacity can reduce shortages. Early contracts can build domestic skills and lower import exposure. Targets help create those conditions before the market reaches full scale. They provide a direction of travel while engineers, customers, and financiers work through the detail. Climate retreat therefore carries a cost that rarely appears in the political arithmetic. A government can weaken a mandate and claim an immediate saving. A company can drop a 2030 target and reduce short-term pressure. Suppliers then postpone investment. Banks raise risk margins, and project developers lose confidence. The saving is visible. The lost market arrives quietly. Sustainable aviation fuel gives us a clean example. Airlines can publish future emissions goals, but fuel producers need bankable demand. A new plant requires feedstock contracts, construction capital, and long-term buyers. An airline target helps the developer argue that demand will exist. A signed offtake agreement makes the case stronger. Several airlines moving together can support a full market. Retreat breaks that sequence. A producer sees weaker future demand and delays the plant. The airline then points to limited supply and high prices. The shortage becomes evidence against the target that would have helped cure it. That circle has a familiar smell. Jet fuel mostly. Green steel follows the same logic. Car makers and construction buyers can set embodied carbon goals. Steel producers then have a reason to examine hydrogen-based reduction, electric furnaces, and cleaner power contracts. These projects require large capex and long operating lives. The steelmaker needs confidence that customers will pay for lower carbon material once production begins. A target helps build that confidence, especially when it feeds into procurement rules. Drop the target and the investment committee sees a conventional market with an expensive green side project attached. The project slips, scale stays low, green steel remains costly. Then come batteries. Automakers, utilities, and industrial buyers shape demand through fleet targets and storage plans. Their commitments influence cell factories, material processors, and recycling plants. A supplier deciding whether to build a battery factory is making a 10-year judgment about demand. Policy changes every election cycle are a poor foundation for that judgment. The Harvard paper finds that supplier responses are stronger when the customer relationship carries more economic weight. A target from a major buyer has more value than a statement from a marginal customer. Suppliers know who pays the invoices. Uncertainty also increases the effect. When future demand is hard to read, a public target carries more information. It narrows the range of possible outcomes and gives management something concrete to plan against. The research reaches a more uncomfortable conclusion. Even targets with limited credibility produced a measurable supplier response. Aspirational goals can still move investment because they reveal customer preference and future procurement intent. That said, corporate theatre still deserves scrutiny. A target needs milestones, reporting and executive ownership. Missed targets should trigger disclosure, explanation, and a revised plan. Deleting the target creates another failure. The signal disappears from the value chain. Suppliers and investors lose the signal. Managers lose an internal deadline. At the end of the day, accountability and ambition belong together. A company should disclose progress each year and explain any shortfall. Procurement teams should convert the goal into supplier requirements. Capital budgets should fund the operating changes. A climate target sitting inside the sustainability department has limited force. Put it into purchasing, product design, and treasury, and the target begins to shape the business. Governments create the same effect at larger scale. Mandates, tax credits, and public procurement all tell markets what future demand may look like. Stable rules allow companies to build around that demand. Policy retreat raises the price of capital long before a law formally changes. Banks start modelling delay risk. Developers add contingency. Suppliers wait for the next election. Europe has spent years building industrial policy around cleaner power, lower carbon materials, and electrified transport. Weakening those signals would affect suppliers far beyond the EU. Equipment firms in Asia would reconsider capacity, while project developers in Africa would reassess export demand. Investors in North America would compare support regimes again. Capital can cross an ocean much faster than a permitting office can clear an application. The same process works in reverse. A clear European procurement target can create orders across global supply chains. A reliable US tax credit can change factory location. An Asian industrial plan can pull down technology costs worldwide. Targets therefore carry geopolitical weight. Countries that preserve clear demand signals can attract factories, skills, and private capital. Countries that change direction repeatedly will pay through higher financing costs and slower deployment. Of course, no one in the Trump administration cares or is listening to this pod. The argument for firm climate goals comes from project reality. We like that it's that grounded and simple. Developers need a bankable route to revenue. Lenders need evidence of demand. Suppliers need enough volume to reduce unit cost. A target begins that chain. A contract strengthens it. A financed asset turns the signal into production. Of course, the quality of the target still counts. A distant 2050 pledge with no interim milestone gives suppliers little detail. A nearer target tied to procurement has far more force. Good targets state specific dates, scope, and operating route. Companies then need to explain which purchases will change. Governments have a job to identify which projects need permits and grid capacity. Physical delivery must keep pace with the demand signal. Green steel needs power. Battery plants require grid connections, while sustainable aviation fuel is dependent upon feedstock and logistics. So targets should pull infrastructure planning behind them. A government that sets a clean industry goal should prepare networks, permits, and finance. Otherwise, demand arrives at a locked gate. Corporate buyers also need to share risk. Early green products often cost more because plants are small and financing is expensive. Long-term contracts can reduce both problems. Price premiums may be needed during the first years. Buyers can use volume commitments or contract floors. Public guarantees might also cover part of the early risk. Once plants grow, costs can fall. Suppliers gain operating experience. Lenders become more comfortable. Competition improves. That sequence explains why retreat can be so expensive. Pulling support during the early years leaves the market trapped at high cost. The company or government then points to that high cost as proof that support failed. The failure sits in the timing. Production was interrupted before volume could do its job. There is also an internal management benefit. A corporate target forces departments to talk about future operations. Purchasing asks suppliers for new products. Finance works through CapEx. Engineering tests what can be built. Even a weak target can start those conversations. A deleted target ends them quickly, especially when margins tighten. That said, every climate pledge deserves scrutiny. Some targets rely on offsets, loose boundaries, or selective accounting. Those weaknesses need exposure. Better target design and harder reporting can restore discipline. Companies should publish annual progress. Boards have an obligation to explain missed milestones. Investors deserve to ask where the procurement commitments sit. Governments face the same test. A national target should connect to permitting, infrastructure, and industrial policy. Targets without delivery plans lose credibility over time. Yet, credibility can be built. The Harvard researchers make that point clearly. Supplier investment can make climate products cheaper and more available, which then makes the original target easier to meet. The target helps create the conditions for its own delivery. That is a useful commercial loop and one worth protecting. It's a sustainable version of Say's law of markets, named after the late 18th century French classical economist Jean-Baptiste Say. The current retreat debate tends to ask how much climate action costs this year. Companies face pressure on margins. Governments grapple on budgets, while voters react to rising household bills. Those pressures are real. The response should examine which target produces value, which policy lowers risk, and which project can earn revenue. Blanket retreat throws away the demand signal before the market has had time to answer it. A serious climate goal is part of market design. It shapes expected demand, supplier behaviour, and capital allocation. It tells industry where future revenue may sit. This is something developers have understood for years. Investment follows credible demand. The first customer changes the economics. The second customer changes the confidence. That 1.9 percentage point response reported after the first target is a supplier hearing the market wake up. The extra 1.4 points after the second target is the market starting to sound real. The 5% rise in climate-related contracts is where aspiration begins to touch procurement. It's blindingly obvious that the cost of climate retreat should be measured in cancelled plants, delayed equipment, and lost learning. It should also include higher import dependence and weaker industrial capacity. Those costs rarely appear beside the headline saving from weaker rules. They emerge later when another region owns the supply chain and sells the technology back at a margin. Have any of our listeners been paying attention to China recently? The closing pressure point is simple. Suppliers will build sustainable aviation fuel plants, green steel capacity, and battery factories when customers give them credible demand. Governments can bolster that demand through stable policy to promote a credible, reinforcing supply-demand loop. Retreat removes the order book before the factory reaches scale. It then leaves politicians and executives wondering why clean technology remains expensive. Well, that's a wrap on our 81st GreenWave podcast episode. Thank you for sharing your time with us during the August holiday season. You can follow the GreenWave podcast on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean. We are also on Spotify, iHeart, and Podchaser. You can find us on Boomplay and Player FM. Please follow the pod, share this episode, and leave a review. You can also follow Synergy International on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Our website is synergy-international.net. Until next time, keep riding the green wave of sustainability.